Hello and welcome to G.P.S, also known as God's Play Steps. I'm your host, Ufen Ekpo, and today I'm with
Michael Rawls
and
Shariba.
So, like we do all the time, let's start off with how's your week been going, Michael?
It's I have to admit it was the same as last time. Last time I was here last week, and it was like, man, I just can't believe how tired I am, how many things I have to do, but just how blessed I am that I have those things. My career, my family, working in ministry. It can be a lot, it can be very tiring, but I'm super blessed that I'm able to be here and able to do these things.
Okay. How about your week? How has it been?
That's good. I think I would agree. Been working on myself a lot lately in terms of trying to slow down and seeing rest as productive. And so it was sort of a tough week, probably emotionally, and trying to knock off all the things off my to-do list. But I think, to speak to what you were saying, Michael, always counting your blessings and remembering no matter what you have on your plate or what's going on or whatever pressures that you've got, there's always something to be grateful for. I'm truly blessed. You did the round of things going on in the world. It's like, I'm okay. So.
And I think you hit on something very important too, just finding rest and just rest in general. Because even just in today's society, we always feel like we gotta move.
Yeah,
if we're not moving, what are we doing?
Right.
Even on days where we're supposed to rest, like the Sabbath, when we are called to rest, we want to do something. Even after church, like, okay, after church, we gotta do this. And our bodies break down.
Yeah.
And honestly, you can't even fully function the way God wants you to if you don't rest.
Amen. Yeah.
And then, even, like I said this before, even Christ rested. But as humans, we think like, oh, we gotta move, even in today's society, which is crazy. And honestly, that's kind of been how my week has been, because school started at one of the colleges I teach at. So I've been having to, and I teach at Victorville, so I've been driving to Victorville, and then the therapy I do is up in Crestline, so I've been driving back and forth to Victorville, the Crestline, back here, picking up my daughter from school. But like you were saying, Michael, and I think we touched on this last time though, I'm not, like, I should be tired, but I just give it all to God, because without it, I'd be like, oh, I don't even want to do anything. Yeah, and even this week, there's been trying things that happened. There was a death in my wife's family, so it just a lot. It was a lot of strain, but I just pushed through it with God. I was just like, God, without you, I can't do anything anyway. So I kept on pushing towards Him. And somehow I have been able to find rest, but I just been giving it to Him. But
That's good.
But you're new to the podcast, so tell people who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I always feel like that's a loaded question. Like, tell me about yourself. I'm Cherie, and I've been a part of Ecclesia for a while now. I think we started coming, my family and I, when I was in high school. So I think I was like 16, 15, maybe younger. Looking over at for confirmation. But so I've been here for a little while, and oldest of two kids. I work in marketing for a geospatial technology company. Before then, a lot of my work was in higher education and nonprofit work. I went to school at Cal State San Bernardino, so I'm a Yodi, and did both my BA and got my MBA there. I graduated. I think we graduated around the same time.
Yeah,
same year. So like, economy totally shut down when we graduated.
That's exactly what happened.
And so I was like, well, I guess we're going back to school. There's no work. But yeah, I'm born and raised in Redlands, California, product of the IE, and I'm a dancer. Just recently accepted leadership over the Praise and Motion ministry here, and I'm a part of the millennial ministry that Michael leads, and so that's a little bit about me, I guess.
Okay. Well, now I learned something about you and Michael now. All of us graduated in 2008. Well, I meant mine, I guess, is a little different. I graduated high school in 2008, but I graduated, so hey, we all went in the club, so let's not be technical. But anyways.
We share graduation.
Right.
Yes. But, so, a question I've been thinking about is, and it's been on my mind even since I started this, or since we started this podcast, was how could we get millennials or just youth more involved inside the church? And what ways could we give youth more roles inside the church? What barriers do you guys even see? So just something I've just been thinking about, and I just want your guys' opinion.
You know, I think one of the first places we have to go when we talk about getting more people involved is understanding. I don't want to say not understanding labels, but that's essentially what it is. The term millennial, or so we're looking at millennials, Gen Zers, and what's coming up it's called the Alpha generation. And so, you know, I think the first thing we have to do and understand is who's who, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the reason why that's important is because, like, when we look at millennials, most millennials are either going to or graduating from college, starting their careers, buying houses, starting families. And so you're looking at people who have these thoughts or these issues or these things going on for them in the world. And then Gen Zers are the ones, you know, either in high school or, you know, they're just graduating from high school and they're kind of, you know, finding their place in the world, and, you know, going to school still. Of course, Generation Alpha are literally babies, literally really young, and it's important to know kind of what they grew up with. Millennials remember a time before the internet, but we kind of grew up with the internet. Gen Z doesn't quite remember that time before the internet. We kind of grew up with the internet. A lot of them came out of the womb swiping. You know, I saw a joke. Gen Z, you know, they were all born with iPads in their hands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were all born with phones. And they had very easy time swiping. And it's going to be interesting to see how this new Generation Alpha, sees technology.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them, you know, phone calls are almost a thing of the past.
Yeah.
You know, we Zoom now, you know what I mean? So it'll be really
right.
interesting. So I think that's the place to start.
Yeah, and actually you hit a very good point too. It's just like, even when you look at even the school system now, is you see kindergartners, even preschoolers, they'll have kids, give the kids iPads or tablets, like, oh, this is where you're going to do your assignments on now.
Yeah.
Pen and paper are a thing in the past. It's just like,
Yeah.
no, use this, and just like, it boggles my mind sometimes. Like, oh, I don't know how this is gonna help. I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, no.
You know, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a huge trepidation with parents who don't want their kids to be raised in front of screens.
Yeah.
And it's, well, your children are going to be raised in front of screens now. The question is, what are you allowing on that screen? And I think that's, for us new millennial parents, I think that's where we're going to have to start, is not being worried about our children being raised by a screen, but checking what is on that screen.
Yeah.
And I think to even that point, like, I think that's a great point, Michael, because it's like, you know, like, I don't have kids yet, but like thinking far in the future of, like, you know, maybe one day when, you know, if and when that day comes, like, to your point, like, there's a future, there's a society moving forward that our kids are going to be raised into. They're going to be exposed to certain things. And how can I take the best of how the experiences that I had, what I was exposed to, and you know, like to your point, we didn't grow up Zooming in class, you know. I mean, in elementary school, I was taught to handwrite, you know. Do I use it? But I was taught to do that, you know. I don't know if our kids are being taught to do those things. And so what about those things are still really valuable and still really are necessary as part of their development, but then not being worried about the progression of society in a sense, but just like you said, being able to navigate that and manage that, like, hey, you know, we're going to be in front of Zoom, but here are some boundaries around that. And in addition to Zoom, you're also going to read a book. You're also going to go outside, or we're going to have some kind of activity where you can play and you can use your imagination instead of maybe being on a game console the whole time. Like, learn how to make up your own games, you know. I mean, there's value in what we experienced and what even our parents experienced and what our kids are going to experience at the same time.
A good example is just my daughter's here today, but like right now she's technically on the iPad, but what you're saying, Michael, is just what are they watching, and like I know exactly what she's watching, and even when she would like watch YouTube at home, if she's watching it, I'd make sure I'm in the vicinity of what she's doing, so I hear everything that she's watching, so I could, maybe I'm not fully focused on what she's watching, but I could hear if something's crazy happens, I'll be like, oh. But a lot of times people just let kids do what they want and not monitor that. And with that, the world's gonna teach them what it means, going back to labels and just everything, the world's gonna teach them what the world wants. Because even with YouTube, there's stuff that looks kid friendly, and you're just like, wait a second.
That's not good.
And so I'm always like, I've always been on top of her, right? Like right now, the only thing she has access to is YouTube Kids, which now she doesn't even go on regular YouTube. As soon as I set that up, she's like, this isn't YouTube Kids. So I'm just like, yes, I did a good job. But this is stuff that's been, it's nothing even really new, because it's stuff that parents had to do back in the day when it comes to music, everything like that. It's just like, oh, what are they listening to with music? What are they doing? It's just more so, it's just, you just gotta keep up to date with what they're doing. And I think I benefit because I am like a therapist, and I work mainly with like elementary school, middle school, and some high school kids. So I kind of know what's going on. So if I see her leaning towards some things, I'm just like, no. Or I'll talk to her about it and tell her like, this is how come I don't want you doing this. And she gets it. She's like, okay, I'm not gonna do that. And then now there are times too where she just like, no, I don't need to do that. Or she sees someone doing it and she's like, oh no. So I'm just like, okay. So it's more so just monitoring, and especially kids at such a young age, when you do monitor them, they build up certain awareness and they start to form their beliefs. Instead of, if you just throw them in front of a tablet or anything, they'll just form their beliefs off that. Like an example, and then we'll move on after this, but with my daughter, like I'm glad I did this, even though I don't follow it, but like my wife would always be like, when she was 3, like, oh, she can have a little bit of soda. I'm like, no soda, no soda, no soda. Now she doesn't even drink any soda. Like, even now, just like if she sees it, like, no, I want water or juice. I'm like, good. And I'm like, I wish I could but
have that discipline.
Yeah, but it's because I taught her that. Now she just she doesn't even desire it.
That's good.
So I'm just like, oh, okay. So
the teaching aspect is good. So you want to create understanding, and the kids understand more, and they're observant. So like, I think that you hit on a good point.
And I think that's one thing that's actually it ties back into what we were talking about with some of the youth that I notice is they're so ingrained in whether it's a tablet or YouTube, they're more attached to a personality that's on the screen than someone face to face. And now it's something that I even think about, just like, that's crazy. Just like they relate more to someone they've never met in person instead of relating to someone right next to them, who's with them, sitting next to them. And some of it may be because it's family dynamics, And some of it too, they don't know how because they just were throwing the tablet at such a young age. So the battle that we actually got to deal with too is how could kids relate to us to want to pour into us so we can share with them?
And a couple of things that you said, you talk about the world, and really the big thing is the world doesn't just tell them how to think, but it tells our kids who they are.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
big right now.
yeah, we have to be very careful of saying, who you are is based on the Word of God, right? And it's not just some arbitrary book of rules. Do this, do that. Don't do this, don't do that. It's a book from a creator who loves you enough for you to be the best form of yourself. And so when you look at the Bible through that lens and through that light, it becomes less of a book about rules, and you'll your children will be, I think, more apt to follow. And even in adulthood, talk about how do we get people of all generations. When we stop approaching the Bible as a book of rules and say these are love letters from the lover of your soul, then it becomes, because people don't really want to follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
But when it becomes, these are love letters from the lover of your soul, then we can start to draw, and we can start to pull people in, and I think that's a really, really big part of it. It's something that we really need to do.
Yeah, especially nowadays, people think the Bible isn't relatable.
Right.
I was actually just sitting with my sister. I was like, anything you go through
Really
in your life, anything, you could find something in the Bible that relates to it. Your friend backstabbing you, your parents backstabbing you, your siblings backstabbing you. All that's there. Infidelity. I mean, robbery. Anything you could think of. Like, I'm trying to think of, just yell something out, it's in there.
Well, it's a living word,
Yeah.
I think it's important to, for me, I feel like it's always been important to point people back to their relationship with Christ, because, then I feel like if you can latch onto this understanding of what is your relationship with Christ, He gave us this word so that we can understand Him, so that we can understand what to do, right? And how to walk and how to be and understand His love for us, right? It's a love letter to us. His word is our understanding of Him, and so, but it is gonna be just rules if you don't understand who it's about. If you don't have a relationship with Christ, then it's kind of like your parents. I feel like if your parents tell you something to do, then if you don't really have a great relationship with your parents, or if you don't really know them, anybody can go off the street and be like, don't touch this bottle, and you'd be like, okay, who told you to tell me, who are you? But my parents, if we have a certain kind of relationship, I look up to them, I hold them in respect, and I understand that if they're telling me not to touch this bottle, whether I understand it or not, whether it makes sense to me or not, they're telling me because they love me, it's for a reason, and I understand their character. And so it's that's why I can obey, even if it doesn't make sense. And it's still hard, we still disobey our parents, right? Not everybody's perfect, but it makes sense, it makes more sense, the boundaries, because I understand where it's coming from. And sometimes we look at rules as loss of freedom, especially right now, right? All these rules around this pandemic, and there's a lot of people talking about loss of freedom.
Right.
But there's boundaries for a reason. Some of it is to actually protect you, whether you understand it or not, and whether it makes sense or not. And so I think for me, it's always, in my life, as I've struggled with the rules in the Bible, it's always kind of what brings me back is understanding my relationship with Christ and having that wrestle in that relationship. And as you continue to wrestle with Christ and you continue to come to Him, then He'll make sense of what's in that Bible for you. He'll make sense of that rule for you. Maybe not in the moment, might take you a little bit, but then there's some times when you come around and you say oh, okay, that's probably why I should have listened to that.
Right.
And I would even look at it as not even rules. I look at more so he gives you a guideline,
Yeah.
steps how to live a better life with less trials, less, it's more so to help you so you don't have to go through anything. So I look at it like I'm just guiding you to help you so you don't have to deal with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that's honestly how it is. I remember someone said like, I wish there was a book that told me how to live life or how to walk through life. It's the Bible.
Yeah.
Because like we said before, just anything you could think of, there's a example. And you could see him walk through it. And going back to how you said too, just the relationship with Christ, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And without that, then sometimes it's even hard just to understand this book. It's like, I don't get this.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is, before you even start reading the Bible, to have that relationship. And that's what helps you understand it even more.
Yeah.
And I think going back to what we were talking about too, I think a hard thing is now with millennials, youth, and children, they have a better relationship with the people on the screen once again than Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we change that?
There was another expert in. I know last week I mentioned something about human trafficking, and listening to an expert on that said one of the things as parents that might be difficult to do is to not fight the fantasy. And here's the thing: when people look on that screen, no matter what it is, television, music, there's a fantasy that artist creates. And then so if we're not guarded, if our hearts are not guarded, we believe that fantasy is reality.
Yeah.
If our minds aren't, especially as kids, are fully developed, we believe that fantasy. You know what I mean? A bunch of kids, who want to be Power Rangers, right? Because I grew up watching Power Rangers, so it was like there's a fantasy. We all wanted to be Morphin Time, right? There's a fantasy. As kids, we believe that, and with that stuff, it could be, it can be. It's not that bad, it could be considered harmless, but the fantasy begins to get worse, and the older you become, and it dictates how you see relationships. It dictates how you see love. It dictates how you live your life. And so you have to be very careful, because when you start to pull people away and say no, that's a fantasy, a lot of times they don't believe it. And so when you fight that fantasy, a lot of times our kids will try to push back and say, no, this is more real. This is more real than what you can see. So you have to be very careful as you're trying to dismantle that fantasy in their minds and pull away and show them, hey, this kind of stuff is fantasy. This is not reality. And I think that's a big reason why. Even with looking at celebrities.
I was about to hit that, because one perfect example, and when this happened, one of my students, the death of Kobe Bryant. I'm not saying anything about it or anything negative, but it hit people so hard. And one of my students, because I teach sociology, so it was a teaching lesson, like, why did it hit people so hard? And I actually related it back to what you said, Michael, is the fantasy. And when we're younger, we think like, oh, Batman or Superman can't die, and something like that. But then as we get older, we have to find, okay, Superman's fake. We got to find something, the closest thing. And what the closest thing to Superman for some people? Kobe.
Right.
So that was like, Kobe can't die. Kobe's like he's the man. Like nothing could happen to him. So they took that Superman and like, okay, something tangible, a celebrity or whoever, Kobe. And that's how come it hit them so hard, because like they can't imagine that. Because like I'm just gonna throw out another athlete. Like imagine how people are gonna be if LeBron James just suddenly died just now.
Right.
Like people who don't even know him are gonna be like crying. But just imagine, but that's that idea of this is a superhero. This is the closest thing to a superhero, and it just, like you said, a fantasy. And I think a lot of it too, going back to fantasy and how come some youth, some millennials don't want to. The fantasies sometimes seem safer than reality. just working with some kids I work with, they don't want to talk about reality. They don't want to deal with reality because reality hurts.
What are they gonna do?
The fantasy where it's just like, oh, I could pretend this, or I could just get sucked up in this YouTuber and just act, all my cares go away.
Yeah.
But in reality, and if you guys are listening, the best, and this isn't even a fantasy, this is a reality. Going to Christ, knowing that I have a Father who's going to take care of me, a Father who loves me. No matter what I do, He will forgive me if I run to Him. I mean, that's a clear protection I want. I don't need a fake fantasy. If you want a fantasy, you don't need a fantasy. This book, like I said, has everything.
Right.
Drama, action, anything romance, anything you could think of. And it's not fantasy. But it just build that relationship with Christ, and you'll know. And you'll understand. But I have seen it, even just with kids I work with, is just they don't want to talk about reality. So even when it comes, I can only imagine kids who do come into church, youth that do come into church, who have been hurt, and they'll. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying. Keep in mind, and you're just saying right now, people who have been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the fantasy is a lot easier to deal with than the reality.
Yeah.
If you are, going to a situation where someone is hurting you, you're going to a situation where things are bad or things aren't good, you might cling a little tighter to that fantasy. And so that's where it becomes very difficult in helping people, because you can't break it for them. You have to help people break down the fantasy and say, this is reality, this is what we have to deal with. As they do look at their reality is very is difficult to deal with.
I think sometimes too, because your question was like, how do we connect, right? Like, in some way. I feel like that is a hard question. Like that's a big question, but also, we can all do what we can in our own small circle, I think about a lot of times, I may not have access to everyone that is, younger than me or older than me or whatever, but the people that I do have access to, I think especially now, because everything is so go, and a lot of things are virtual, it's much easier to text somebody than it is to call them. It's more convenient.
For some, don't text me because I always tell people, and everyone who knows me, just call. If you have a question, just call me.
Just call?
Yeah. Because even my wife would be like, I text you. I'm like, yeah, just call me. Especially when I'm running, but even before then. In college, people would just be like, I learned just to call you. I'll be in the middle of a text. I'm not.
I'm not doing that.
I just stop. I'll do something else. I'm like, oh, I'm texting this person. I'm like, oh, what's going on? And then I just go on about my day, forgetting the text, not purposely.
Yeah. You're like, I need a phone call. At some point, it's a phone call. Totally get that. Yeah, but we have with technology's progression, we have more opportunity to not connect. And but if somebody's in your circle, just kind of taking a moment to see that person and hey, it's probably easier for me to text, but let me just check on my people and let me call them and say, hey, how are you doing? And sadly, it's an anomaly today. We don't do that, and even when I get cards from people, I'm like, wow, someone sent me a card because they heard I was sick. That's we don't do that anymore, But I think that's what I'm trying to learn to do, or try to do more, is let's just see people. And if you're walking down the street and you happen to pass by someone, wave, say hi, check on people. And I think the more that nothing takes away from physical connection. And so once we can do that more, I think it'll be easier to for people to connect, because what people are getting from like maybe the virtual or the fantasy is like in some way, shape, or form they're resonating with them.
Yeah.
But like if you're in your own like circle and you're not like, and they're in your physical distance, but you're not like trying to resonate, if you forget to look up, then like what have you given people? Like all they have is this curated content of like automatic connection, like, oh, we like the same thing, so I'm gonna like I connect with you in that end. But I don't really know you, but I know you play basketball and I'm trying to play basketball, and like you're an inspiration and everybody loves Kobe, so yeah, I'm gonna connect with you. But if you like sit down and talk to somebody else that's across the way, they might like basketball too, and they might share the same struggles you do, or they might have the same background, and there's probably an even stronger connection because you can actually continue to talk to them, you know, like, so but I don't have the answer because like I don't know everybody, you know, but I feel like that would be like a way to.
Well, I think you hit on one of the biggest things, is just pouring into people, because people don't care. You could say the most enlightening thing to someone, but if they don't think you care, or you don't show that you care to them, they don't care what you have to say. And it's a cliche, but it's honestly true. People don't care what you know until they know that you actually care for them. And I think that's one of the biggest things with whoever you're ministering to or just pouring into, is they need to know you care for them. And not only that, another thing now is they want to know if someone's real. Do you really like basketball? Are you a real person? Because the thing that I notice now, even when I teach or do counseling, I'll dress up in a suit and tie, and most people will say, "Oh, don't do that because the kids will think, or the students will think, or your clients will think you're better than them." Because you hear that, like, people who dress up in a suit and tie think something differently about themselves. But that's just me. I'm just being myself. And there's been times when I would dress down, like possibly like this. I've had a client who'd be like, "What's wrong with you? Are you okay? Did your wife make you wear that?" I'm like, "No." But it just they knew who I was, and it's just like I'm not pretending to be anyone else. And that's the biggest thing I feel like. Honestly, even inside the church, they feel like I can't relate to this person because maybe I do feel like they're pretending. They feel so standoffish, like, oh, this person seems so holy, or even not even that. Maybe they have someone who is a minister or grew up in the church, and they're like, oh, they seem holy, but I know not everything's perfect. So they have that standoffish thing too. So just like, and when you don't reach out and kind of just show them and they don't see that you're real and know that you really care for them, they're not gonna pour into you or come to you.
See, I think that's another kind of issue, is that when we pay more close attention to the fantasy than the reality, the fantasy is someone is perfect. That's the fantasy. The reality is that we're all profoundly flawed individuals. So, you know, no matter how holy you are, or no matter how holy anybody is, you're going to see them mess up at some point. Doesn't make them any less real. Doesn't make them, you know, any less spiritual, or you term holy, or whatever term you want to use, right? But the truth is that we are, like I said, we are all profoundly flawed, and I think that's a big thing on both sides of the coin. When we look at, as we're, you know, talking about how do we get more people, whether they be millennials, whether it be Gen Z, whether it be, you know, Gen Alpha, as we're raising them up, as they're coming up, how do we get them to want to come to church? And I think on both sides is that we let them recognize that we're profoundly flawed, and that we need help, and then we let them know, as they are profoundly flawed and they need help, we're here for them, and we're not here to judge them. It goes back to people thinking the Bible is just a book of rules, and so those super holy people, as we see them, they have the same thought or the same idea, is that in order to be a man of God, a woman of God, you have to follow these rules. So when you don't, we're going to judge you for it. We're going to come down on you for it, as opposed to saying, you know, again, these are the love letters for the lover of your soul, and he knows that you are going to mess up. The whole reason that he sent his son to die for our sins, because he knew.
Yeah.
Because he knew. So as it's becoming an everyday process, we have to realize that we are flawed. And even if, as pastors stand before us, I think back to all the pastors who, the big mega church pastors who have, have all the fanfare and all the, and the ones who've fallen from grace so hard. And it's just, having a realization they are profoundly flawed. Doesn't excuse what they did. If anybody has hurt you in any way, I don't want to make it look like, that it's okay. Doesn't excuse what they did, but we have the realization that they are profoundly flawed. As humans, that's just who we are. And now we are pushing towards, holiness and pushing towards Christ.
Yeah, and then a perfect example in Hebrews 12, verse 1, it says, all these many people who have had faith in God are around us like clouds. Let us put everything out of our lives that keep us from doing what we should. Let us keep running in a race that God has placed for us. Let us keep looking to Jesus. Our faith comes from him, and he is the one who makes it perfect. He did not give up joy when he had to suffer shame and die on the cross. He knew of the joy that would be in his ladder. Now he is sitting at the right side of God. And actually, this kind of sums up everything we were kind of talking about. Just the fear of reality and sticking to fantasy. And even like you were talking about, even with rules, the Pharisees always cling to those rules, like, oh, we need to follow these rules. These rules are what's going to get us to heaven. These are what we need to do. Yeah. And throw that all aside. You just cling to Jesus, the only one who is perfect. Like Michael was saying, we're flawed. Pastors are flawed. I always tell people, don't look to me, because if you look to me, I'm going to let you down one way or another.
Right. I wholeheartedly, man, that's why I tell people, like, hey, I can't save you. Don't look at me. You're gonna see me mess up. Let's be real. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
I had a Spanish teacher. You remember? He, in high school, every time somebody he would say something or do something silly, and then every time someone would say, "Oh my God," he'd be like, "I'm not your God." But it's funny, like with things you hold on to, but it's like already you're right.
Right.
But like man, like we look to man sometimes as a God figure, and it's like no, there's only one God.
Right.
And that's how come, like Michael was saying, that's the only reason why he sent Christ is because everyone was so confused. They made it, and we do this to this day because nothing's new under the sun. We always make things more complicated, but Jesus came. He showed us. Don't look at all this stuff now. Just look at me. That I actually just. It's crazy because I just thought of that. I never even looked at it like that. Like, don't look at all the other stuff. Just look at me.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes focused on him.
Like, there's so much noise and distraction. There's so much in your face things. I mean, going back to the, so many things to do. Like, there's so much that information you have to filter through. There's so much, news, things that you have to do. I mean, and a lot of that times, it's really a distraction. Like, keep your focus keep your eyes on, on Jesus, and he'll direct you. He'll let you know, you should pay attention to that. You probably, that's a little, you shouldn't pay attention to that. Sift through.
And even, I said this, I think the time I was by myself, but I didn't say it for you guys to hear, but, one thing that came to me too was even some of the questions that we have about the Bible or about Christ, some people get hung up on those questions like, oh, when is really Christ's birthday? Because he can't be born in December, or I mean, there's so many I can't think of some. But the thing is too, like, as soon as we die and are in heaven, we're not even gonna think about these questions. The only time these questions are in our mind and are so important is when we're down here.
Yeah.
Like, when we're up there, we're not gonna think about it. We're not gonna be like, God, when was Christ born? Like, I'm not. I guarantee, like, you're gonna be like in awe and everything else. But when we're here, we think it's so important to know these things that it doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, but that's just who we are as
Human
people.
nature,
Yeah.
To be honest, it's, you know, because we don't have a grasp on things, those higher things, those spiritual things, because we don't have a very firm grasp. I mean, we do ask the questions. When was Jesus born, or how can certain things happen, or, you know, all these types of things, and we do, and you know, you can go back to the conversation about rules and the Pharisees. We about to say you're gonna have to
She got
you know,
something to say too.
right. You play the dad role. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
What you gotta say? What you gotta say? You gonna say something?
Yeah.
What are you gonna say? You don't know? You gonna say hi? Say hi.
Hi.
You wanna be the center of attention?
Yeah.
She's like, yeah.
Yeah.
At least she's honest,
Right,
huh? She
completely
does,
honest
exactly.
about it. I want to be the center of attention.
She's like, y'all have been talking too long. It's my turn.
All right.
Say that.
Don't say that. Okay.
Bye.
You need something else?
Bye.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was fun. But yeah, just, and you know, I often think about, like, when we think about rules, we look at Levitical law, look at the law in Deuteronomy, and there are all these kind of rules, and then, you know, God really broke them down in the 10 Commandments, right? And when you look at the 10 Commandments, they're actually broken down into 2 commandments. And Jesus says it, you know, I give you 2 commandments. Love God, and the second is like the first, love your neighbor. And really, we have to break it down as we approach the ideal of how do we get more people in, right? The answer's right there. Love God, love your neighbor, right? Oh man, you know, church attendance might be low. Love God, love your neighbor. You know, I have a family member who doesn't believe. Love God, love your neighbor. And when we can break it down, that whole Levitical law, all of the law in Deuteronomy, they break it down to the 10 Commandments. When we break it down into those just 2 commandments, I think we would have a much easier time of getting more people to come in, as the topic of this discussion began. How do we get more people in? I think that's really the big thing. And as we do that, as we love God and we love our neighbor, we have to realize that our neighbor is going through some things. And as a result, remember again, you know, realizing we're all profoundly flawed, and you know, all these different things. We see our neighbor is going through this stuff, is to love our neighbor. And I think a big part of that is, let's talk about the things that we are going through as people, as opposed to you know, just sticking with trying to be super holy.
Yeah.
You know, the big one is you walk around, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm blessed.
Yeah.
Like, but are you really? No, like,
Do you
you may
really
be
feel
blessed
that
to be
way?
alive, but
Yeah.
yeah, do you really feel that way?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the big, the really big thing, is that we have to ask the question, you know, how are we really doing? Or what do we really need to talk about? Right?
And that actually ties into even just mental health in general, because when we think of mental health inside the church, that's something that people don't even want to touch. It's just like, if you're not blessed and you're going through something, you need to pray more.
Yeah.
You need to cling to God more. And a therapist told me this, and I think it's true. Is yes, you can cling to God, but when your mental health isn't there, going back to being close to God, sometimes it may be distorted because your mental health, you may like, oh, God told me to do this, but it's so distorted because your mental health isn't there. Whether it's you're not resting enough, you're not hearing
Yeah.
God clearly, so your mental
Yeah.
health isn't there. So both of them are important, because I guarantee some people you see in the street who aren't mentally healthy, they'll tell you about God, but it's so distorted because the stuff got mixed up and they're not fully mentally there. So now when they hear from God, it's just like it's all distorted and they don't hear it clearly. Because when you're not mentally healthy, how can you hear it clearly? I could barely hear it clearly if I'm hungry or if I'm tired.
Right. That's a very good point.
No, I think what we're touching on right now is like, I often think like, sometimes we think that, like, you know, to know Christ, or if you follow his, like, you know, his commandments or whatever, to say you're blessed means like inherently the opposite is that you'll never go through anything hard.
Right.
Or like you don't ever struggle with something. And it's like, but like, how reasonable is that? We're all human. Like, we live in a fallen world. We all get sick. So if you get sick, does that mean you're not blessed?
Right.
It's a byproduct of being human in this world. And so it's totally reasonable to have a tough day and struggle with like some sort of mental, you know, illness, or just like you're just having a day, like, right? Like, you have some anxiety, you got fear, whatever it is that we struggle with. That's called being human. like, and going through this world. But like, blessing is like, I think that's why God asks us to count our blessings, because even if you're going through something difficult, well, I can say I'm blessed and highly favored whether I feel it or not, because I have God, because he is the one who sustains me through it. And so this is really hard. I would rather not go through this, but at least I have someone who said he will never leave me or forsake me to get through this, and I don't know if I want to go through this without him. Like, I'm blessed to have that. Does that mean that, to your point though, like, some of us just say blessed and highly favored so that we can like push past and pretend that we're not struggling, and that's totally a separate thing. But like, it is possible to be blessed and struggle. It's called being human.
And going back to what we were saying before, there are people in the Bible where we see them go through stuff.
Yeah.
We see them go through depression and anxiety.
Right.
Moses had a speech impediment. He didn't want to speak in front of people.
Right.
He's like, haha, no. And he always pushed it aside. But God worked through him.
Yeah.
But it's still there. David went through so much stuff. Like,
Yeah,
don't even
he
get
went
me
through
started
a
on
lot.
him. Depression, anxiety, all that stuff. But
You know, it's, you know, going back to the whole thing about being real, and part of that is, you know, let's be real enough to say, and you know, I hate to say it, but let's talk about the African American church.
Yeah.
I think song I really enjoy listening to, As Long as I Got King Jesus, right? And the idea, as long as I got King Jesus, I don't need nobody else. Those are the lyrics. You know what I mean? If I could sing them, I would, but I'm a horrible singer, so I'm not even going to try. But y'all know the song. And listening to that song, realizing it may not be completely accurate. Because if we look in the Bible, and we look at Adam literally had everything. You know what I mean? He had King Jesus, right? And then God still looked at him and said, Adam was lonely. And it's this amazing thing that we forget. Jesus walked with 12 disciples, right? And so we kind of forget, you know, and it's like, oh, have you prayed more? You know, you can pray a whole lot, and then God, in that prayer, God will probably send someone to you or send you to someone. And if you are that person God is sending, you need to listen.
Yeah.
And that ties into what you were saying before with the commandments. And honestly, when you said the only two things you got focused on is love God and love your neighbor.
Right.
But even if you even dissect them, all of them still tie to that. Like, it tells you how to love your neighbor. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't covet.
That's
so it tells you all the 10 commandments just mean those two things.
Right.
It shows you what you should do to your neighbor, how to love your neighbor, what you shouldn't do, and it shows you how you need to honor God.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the 10 commandments. Nothing else. There's nothing else in there except those things.
And the other thing that we need to make sure of is that we seek professional help.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is good to have a friend,
Yeah.
but sometimes that friend isn't always accurate in their advice.
Yeah.
You know,
Wise
we have,
counsel.
yeah, right, seeking wise counsel as opposed to, you know, that friend who's going to tell you to go off all the time. Which brings me, I know last week I mentioned we were doing a conference on October 9th from 10 to 1. One of the big topics we're going to touch on is this topic of mental health, and we're going to get an actual, you know, expert who's going to come in, who's going to kind of talk about, you know, where do you start in your mental health journey, you know, and coming, you know, being a part of the African American church, and that whole demeanor ideas, oh, as long as I got King Jesus, or we don't need to talk to no therapist, or things of that nature. As millennials are getting older, that's a tradition we are starting to break. And we're starting to say, well, no, I need to speak to a professional.
Mm-hmm.
I need to speak to a counselor, a therapist. Mm-hmm. And our good friend Dr. Cassandra Page, she's going to touch on kind of how do you start that mental health journey, because it can be very difficult coming from this tradition of we don't see therapists. I need to see a therapist. So now how do I do that?
Yeah.
So that's going to be a lot of fun on October 9th, excuse me. From 10 to 1, it's going to be completely on Zoom. So if you go to ecclesiachurch.com, look at the banner, check the banner, you can be able to sign up there.
Great.
Yeah, and you touched on one thing, and I'll even just elaborate a little more too. We think like mental health, like it's African Americans don't like talking about it, but it's, honestly, it's most people in general. The Asian community, they don't like talking about it.
That is true.
The Hispanic
community,
nope.
They have a hard time talking about it.
Especially men, just in general.
Yeah.
Women, they can talk more, but men in general don't. And as a therapist, I've seen it. As a therapist, even me being a male therapist, people are just like, oh.
Right. It's crazy, right?
People don't want, and we talked about this a little bit, people don't want me to see their kid because I'm a male. And their stigma on males, like, oh, you want to see my boy that has anger issues and everything like that? I don't know if I want you to see him. I'm just like, okay. In my mind, I'm like, I'm probably the best person because they probably don't have a male figure, or their male figure isn't a positive one. But it happened, like, it's something you don't think about, but it happens a lot. It's just like the males, they don't have good male figures, and now the parents may already have bad perception of a male, so it's just like, oh, what's this male therapist gonna do? And it's tough. So you got to build that, and it's a battle.
Yeah.
But
our whole idea of kind of masculinity dictates that, or being, or dictates that you don't go to people for help. And so that's a big thing with, you know, men in therapy in general. The reason why we're less likely to, women are seen as, you're allowed to talk about your problems, right? You have 4, 5, 6 friends, 10, 20 friends who you can talk about, but men, we gotta be tough. We gotta be strong. You know, man, don't let your homies find out you went to a therapist. Are you serious? Like, you went to a therapist? Are you? What's wrong with you? And it's like, you know, instead of having that encouragement, we get put down for going to see. So if you have that, how many men are actually going to go see a therapist?
Yeah, and even when men go through stuff, I'll just use this one as an example. If men are, let's say, abused by their spouse, oh, what, you're letting your spouse abuse you? You better do something about it. And then it's like, oh, but that's the stigma. And it got so, things have been changing now, but it got so bad that even when a man will call the police on their spouse, the police will be like, what are we going to do? Like, really? What do you want us to do? But things are better now, but it's just like, men can't, that's a stigma on men. Actually, we should have a discussion clear about that. Kind of, we can go on and on about that. But,
yeah, that's an important conversation to have.
And then I even talked to mental health, like men can't show fear, can't show anxiety, can't be depressed. All they can, and this is what's pushed on by, going back to what we talked about before, by the media, by the tablets, by all this stuff. We need to be the man, we need to not be worried, we need to, even when it comes to women, don't get stressed about women and use them, look at music, look at media. So it's just like,
huge problem there.
So I can't be vulnerable. And if I'm vulnerable, and I think we talked about this. Yeah. Oh, I don't think it was I don't think I talked about it with you guys, but the sad thing when men are vulnerable, the word that other boys like to use, and this starts in elementary school. They'll use, they'll call them a girl or call them any word that refers to a female, and it's just like, oh, what is that saying about females now? And because they're not this, you're going to lesser them, or you quote unquote try to lessen them by calling them female. Like that's opening up another can of worms that we could definitely sit and talk about. But
yeah, I know. Sometimes, and unfortunately, it happens. I love sports, but sometimes, unfortunately, it happens. You're playing like a girl, you're hitting like a girl, and so we're putting down women to say that women are not as good, and then again, that goes along with that toughness and that hardness, and that men are strong, and so then does that make women weak? And then that's a huge problem that we have.
Yeah, I think we have such a distorted view of what strength is.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, it's really a sign of strength for you to be able to be vulnerable. It takes courage. But I mean, and that kind of goes back to like we were talking about with what we see in the media, what we're exposed to, and the fantasy. Like, it would be lovely if none of us ever had to experience fear or anxiety, but like we all grapple with it, and like on each side of the coin, between men and women, there's these stereotypes and expectations put on you that is like we're human. So like we just have such a distorted view of what really is what. And I think into going back to what you're saying about like love and like how the Bible is like all the commandments and the rules, and they teach you how to love. And I think that's going back to the Bible too. Like it teaches you what true courage and strength is, what true love is. Like, how do you love?
And I think it goes back, and I think this verse, when I picked it up, it's a perfect one. At the end of the day, we gotta let us keep looking to Christ, to Jesus, because Jesus was he lived it all, but he wasn't for men. He wasn't macho. He wasn't that. He was more loving. He was what society wouldn't look at as a man today, or look at as a stereotype man today. He wasn't that, and that's who we should be looking at. But instead, we want to look at, and I'm not saying anything bad about these people. Instead, we're looking at Kobe. We're looking at Batman. We're looking at Superman. Like, nah, look at Christ.
And I mean, I think about the strength it took to keep him from getting off the cross and totally wiping out everybody, destroying everybody, and the strength and that strength in the love he had for us, that he was willing to do this thing. So I know, and this also happens to pastors, right? This idea of if as a pastor you need help, mental health, then you are not strong enough. You are not prayed up enough. You don't have, the willpower or whatever it is. And then we turn around and we see pastors committing suicide. And it's a really sad thing that they don't have. They're losing that ability to go to someone and say. I think Dr. Rob Strong was telling me about a pastor that they was at this church, and what they did, they had all the fanfare and everything, and they would walk in a certain way, and then they would kind of walk down the aisle, and the pastor would stop and go in the pulpit or whatever, and he was saying this pastor thought one day, what if he just kept walking and walked right out the door? Like, he was so tired, he was so frustrated, he had so many things on his plate and on his mind. He just had the idea of what if I just was just done and just kept going. And so when we have people who don't have someone to go to, we see a high number of pastors committing suicide, and I think that's very sad.
Yeah, and not even suicide. I say most pastors who even just fall do something that's normally out of their character, falls in that same category. They feel overwhelmed, just stressed. So I feel like that's just having someone to talk to, even just someone like, man, I'm thinking about this, because that's all therapy is. It's just kind of just helping sort out your thoughts. You could be like, oh, I'm thinking about this, and then I'll be like, I'll just repeat it. Like, so you're telling me that you're thinking about you're married and you're thinking about talking to this girl from that part of your church. And then when you repeat it, they'll be like, yeah, I know I shouldn't.
Right, that sounds stupid.
Yeah.
Why am I saying?
Yeah, but a lot of people don't do that.
Right.
Like, going back to, we keep it in, but when you talk it out, you say something back and just repeat it, you'll be like, oh yeah, that is stupid. Like you said, that is stupid. Why would I do that?
Right,
but
even,
you don't hear it until
yeah.
you say it.
Right, and even just, you know, it could be so like, you know, I'm just gonna do it. I'm thinking about doing it. And then you hear, or it could be something as simple as, you know, she keeps wearing them pants to church, and I keep seeing. I'm trying to not look at her, but it's getting difficult. It's getting difficult for me to not look at her. I need to talk to someone about that. I need to deal with that, right? Yeah. And if you don't have someone to turn to and someone to talk to, there might be a day where you decide to do a little more than just look at her, right? Because you were never able to talk about it and to go to somebody and be like, man, you know, maybe they say, hey, maybe you should, you know, look at a different direction. Look over on that side of the church instead of this side of the church, you know, and someone can really help you. Or a bigger thing is, why do you feel like you need her? You know what I mean? What is it?
What the deeper
what's the deeper issue there? What are you looking for in this that you feel like you need her and your wife is insufficient? You know what I mean? And then kind of
not just that time in the relationship. Like, we're about to open a can of worms.
That's another one set for another day.
Yeah. So I think after we got enough stuff, or we just are giving you the appetizer of what's going to happen when you have your thing on Saturday coming up.
Well, I feel like that even like speaks to, you know, what is the assembly of the church? Because I mean, I feel like right now we're talking about like relational, like, you know, we're built to be relational, and so like, why does the church matter? Well, because I feel like conversations like these matter. Like, like we all could use encouragement in our journey, and the assembling of church, whatever form or shape that is, and we'll talk about that at the huddle, but like, I mean, there's importance and there's value there, because like, if you isolate, we're not meant to be isolated.
Right.
So like,
you'll do something dumb.
You'll do something dumb, because I mean, you're the only one talking to you, or somebody else is talking to you. Like,
and that's
mostly
And that's all Satan wants, is when he gets you by yourself, you're not talking to anyone.
You need to bounce off the ideas, like.
And that's how come accountability is so important.
Super important.
And that's honestly one of the reasons why we made this. Is if you don't have an accountability partner, even some of the stuff we just talk about together, some stuff like as I was talking today, some stuff I didn't even think about, but as I'm just talking, I just thought about, like, wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
And it's just the relationship with God, and when you're with other people to have these conversations with. Because at the end of the day, we all fall short.
Yeah, we do.
And that's how come we made this podcast, is to help guide you guys. G.P.S, God Placed Steps. God Placed Steps to help you guide through this crazy world that we're living in. To give us an idea of what to do when situations happen. And we just invite you guys to continue to watch with us. Tell your friends. Come out one of these days. If you want to sit in and have to share your opinions, this is what it's about. We're not here to judge. We're just here to help guide, as Christ called us all to guide people to His kingdom.
Yeah.
But all right, so let us close off in prayer. Or do you have anything else you want to say, Michael?
No, I mean, and I always just remember, once again, plug the Millennial Huddle, October 9th, completely through Zoom. Visit www.ecclesiachurch.com, and you'll be able to sign up there, and we'll get you the Zoom link. And we're going to have this, you know, we started the conversation about mental health. We're going to have a, you know, like I said, a professional come finish that conversation, really dig deep into it. As Sheree, you were saying, talking about forsaking not the assembly. Corey Smith, a few of you guys know him. He was with us last year when we did it last year. He did a lot of work here in this church. He's going to talk about that. And then, of course, we're going to touch on race and racism in the church. And we're going to have a few people, you know, we have we have a lot of history, you know, living within you know, this church, and we're going to hear that from a few people. They're going to talk about it, and we're going to be able to kind of dissect and work through all that kind of stuff. So again, October 9th, from 10 to 1. You know, register so we can get you the Zoom link so you can join us. Love to have everybody there.
Great.
And Sherry, do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I feel like this has been an awesome conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone show up virtually on that Saturday. So have continued conversation. I feel like this conversation and these types of conversations need to continue. We need each other. Yeah.
All right. So let's end up in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for this conversation that you've given us tonight, Lord. Lord, as we gather here together, Lord, I just pray for everyone who's listening, Lord. Any stumbling blocks they've been going through, anything they've been dealing with mentally, Lord, that you just help them. Give them someone they can talk to. You give them rest also, because we know when we lean towards you, we do have rest. But also just give them someone they could talk to, someone they could be accountable to, Lord. Lord, and for those who just are listening and don't know you, Lord, I just pray that you pull on their heart, Lord, and they just cling to you, Lord. For we know that everything is all about you, Lord. Like we just said in the verse, Lord, we need to put our eyes on you, not on the world, not on the athlete, not on the celebrity, but on you, Lord. For, Lord, without you, we have nothing, Lord. Lord, and we just thank you for what you are doing and what you continue to do, Lord. Lord, I just lift up everyone in this church and everyone just in the world and just in the community in general, Lord, because we need you more than anything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.